we're not 100% happy with the developer experience. We had like a sign that always said like 0 days since the last issue with WPML.
Today we're talking about global and translatable options.
Woohoo.
What is that? We have created a concept in our WordPress sites to manage global and translatable options. Sounds pretty straightforward, right? But what is that in detail, Dominic?
Yeah, so we have components, and you can embed a component anywhere, like on a page, on a post, on a custom post type, whatever. And you sometimes, or these components have options. And sometimes the scope of an option is tied to the actual place where you insert it. In that case, we add actually fields, like custom fields, and we've talked about that in our data modeling episode, where we have defined fields for ACF inside of the component definition, basically. So whenever you say it's an advanced custom fields flexible content field, and then you insert a layout, and inside of the fields for this layout, there are different options. For example, a theme that you can pick for a component, right? So that if you have a WYSIWYG blog, that you pick if it has a different background color than the regular website or something like that, and different colors inside as well. So these are options that are scoped to the actual place of insertion. But then sometimes you want to have options that apply to this component or to all of the components of a certain type on your website. So that means like for example, labels, like default labels, or a fallback image is a good example, right? So a fallback image where you say you want to have you have a hero, and this hero should have a fallback image, but you can also set your own image, and you can configure like a fallback image inside of something that we call a global option. And these global options, they are basically also a WordPress menu, or they show up in the WP admin in the main menu as global options. And when you click on it, like, you will see all the different components and their respective options. So yeah, and this is the global option, right? So you want to have one fallback image for all of these components of a certain type on your entire page. But in some cases, you might not want to have a global option that applies to all the fields on your site, but you might want to have something that is different for different languages. Like in the case for the fallback image, this would be if your fallback image had like some piece of text on it, like not found or something like that. That you might want to load like this not found text in a different language, right? And you would need to define a different fallback image for this then. So, and these are basically the two different types, because a lot of our websites are actually translated or are multilingual, and we want to give as much freedom as possible in specifying these like site-wide options for our clients, for the editors of the websites in the end. And that basically sums it up, right? These are global and translatable options. Yeah.
Yeah. What more is there to say?
Yeah. So go ahead, do this.
Do this, use this. Yeah. I think like this is a concept that we just like defined for ourselves as a best practice to always have the same thing. The way we are using or creating those option pages is via ACF, right? Because there's an easy way with ACF to create option pages.
Exactly. That's like another feature of ACF Pro that you can create different option pages and add like field groups or different fields to that as well. And there's like a lot that you can do with it, right? Because like also sometimes I just now talked about like default values, but what are other like use cases for that? So if you want to have like a drop down maybe somewhere in your in a component, And there should be, like, for example, what we use a lot of the times, SVGs. Like you can pick an SVG from a list, right? Or you want to have like a list of not tags, but a list of words that you can choose from. So then we could offer you a global option where you can upload different SVG images, give it a name, and then in the once you've saved that in all your components, you would have like a new option to choose from, or a new option to choose inside of the components. So where a lot of the times in CMSs or in like custom coded projects, you would see a lot of like static stuff that where the client actually has to call the developer and say, yeah, but now we need like another option here, or we need to extend this in a certain way. And we always try to prepare everything for our clients so that they do not need to call us for changing general stuff either. So and that's where these options come into play mostly.
Yeah, it's an additional feature to add more stuff that people can do more stuff themselves with their website. Absolutely. I think other use cases are just like, for sometimes people want to have some configuration option for animations, even like a slider. How long should it take until it slides to the next page? And you want to change that on a global level. Or like with these SVGs, for example, managing those in the global options or translatable option. I think this could also be used as a separate kind of security feature for the site, like that you allow editors to use the options within the components, but with the global options that you only give access to admins kind of for that functionality. Or you could even like have some tracking scripts or extra scripts added there in the backend and some options, and then provide these generalized options to people, to editors when editing a page. So it's a very structured way to do things like this, but overall, extends, I think, the capabilities of WordPress a lot. This is one of those features where I feel WordPress should have this out of the box kind of, or it would be great to have this type of system. And for us, it almost feels like it's like a cascading system. Like we have global options, which can be applied to, it's just like one value that you can get and it can access from everywhere. Then translatable options, like which can be translated. Maybe we should talk about how that works with what kind of plugins and so on. And then those options within the component field, and you can also like nest them and so on. But it always it feels like the same concept when you need an option within a component, just on coming from different levels. I like that a lot. Yeah. And again, this isn't something we entirely invented, because option pages, it's a concept from ACF Pro. But I think what took us a while and a couple of iterations, is standardizing this. When we started creating option pages, they were kind of all over the place in terms of whenever we developed a new project, we created several option pages and then added several different option pages to the menu structure, and they weren't called global options, but sometimes it was just the options, then it was settings, then translatable settings, and then we had translatable settings and translatable options, and then a subgroup for custom post type and so on. And config. We just at some point config whatever
config.
Yeah, right. And then
you see, like when this is already hard for a single developer or for an agency working on a single project, right? That's why there is like such a why these things are all over the place in WordPress, right? So you have plugins that add new menu items like on the top level. Then you have plugins that add stuff to the tools main item, or then to settings and so on. So it's always in WordPress a bit hard to find out where things are at, right? And sometimes it's, and this is so nice about this approach as well, as you already said, you just want to have things in one place. Like, for example, a lot of the times we have like a Google Analytics or Tag Manager ID right next to your Google Maps API key, kind of, right, in the backend. And there are just like these settings. So and this makes it like super useful and usable for the client, or in this case, usually, as you also said, these global options are sometimes not for the editors, but for the admins. So when there is someone from the client who's more technical or who manages these kind of things, the access tokens and so on, that they can add them in the backend, and editors don't have access to that at all, right?
And it makes it very maintainable for us as developers now as well, because whenever someone asks, like, where can I find that? Like, I don't find that option. And it's like, hey, the easy answer is, hey, did you look into the global options or translatable options already if it's there? And many times it is, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we used to have one main item in the menu, and then one sub item for every component, kind of. We don't do that anymore. This resulted in like tons of sub items, and sometimes it was really hard to navigate. So now we put them all into an accordion. Like for each component, there's like an accordion element that you can open and close. By default, it's closed, where you can then edit these options. There's one downside to that, however, right? And this is also, like, you see that it's not like these custom pages are not really like first-class citizens in WordPress, so to say. Because when one person is editing the options, another one could potentially also be editing the options, and you could override that. This is the current state of it. However, we might implement like a heartbeat based solution where you would actually be notified if somebody else was editing this page. But out of the box, you unfortunately do not get this.
But as this doesn't get edited so much, like we haven't run into many problems with that so far. Also with having all the options on one page and in tabs, right? Or it's like more an accordion. We can also easily break out of that. You can still create sub pages if it's getting out of hand. But for many regular websites, there are not that many items. Like, of course, like it could be 10, 15 tabs for different components and settings, but they usually only have then 2 or 3 things in it as well.
Yeah. And this is also like super nice. Like this is an API that we basically set on top of the ACF API for registering options, because you can just do, well, by default, we have these 2 main pages, right? The translatable options and the global options. And then you can just say, okay, what the title of the subgroup should be. So that's usually your component name. Then you define the fields, what these options should be. And then you have like an optional third parameter to define like a subpage. So if you leave that blank, it will put it into the default group. And just by like adding one string, you can easily create new subpages and have a more structured or organized thing. And sometimes we've used this for archive pages, right? So where we had like for custom post types or taxonomies, we had like page components, or like maybe some post type options, not necessarily only archives and so on. So this is like really nice to structure your your options.
Yeah, right.
Settings for your theme.
How are translatable options managed, or like technically how does it work? I remember a time when we didn't have like both of them. I think we only had like general options or settings, and then we ran into issues at some point because we more or less discovered that like when someone had a multi-language site, you set an option and you had to update it also in another language. We were using WPML back then already, I think. Was it?
Yes.
And it has like multiple options. It has the option to switch between languages, but also to show options for all pages. But it was kind of confusing and didn't always work. So we had issues with returning always the same value. How does that work now? Is that, and with what kind of approaches is it compatible?
Yeah. So we are still using WPML, which always starts discussions because we're not 100%. We're not 100% happy with the developer experience with WPML, right? And there used to be this running gag where we had like a sign that always said like 0 days since the last issue with WPML. So,
oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember? So I don't want to be bashing anything or talking bad about it because I mean, as you see, like, or as you can tell, we are using it, and it's like the best option we have so far for our clients and for us. But like it could be probably done a lot smoother, or sometimes things could go a lot smoother. But I guess it's a really difficult topic to have like multilingual sites, and that's why I'm also really glad that as a part of phase 4 of the Gutenberg project, we will most likely see a native multilingual solution for WordPress, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yes. Okay, but you asked the question.
There's like that. I think that's not even a timeline. That is more like like at some point, I think more to make sure we're not working on this right now. But
I mean, phase 3 will start now, kind of, right? And if it takes 1 year, 2 years, you never know.
Yeah.
And then, because this is also like a topic that's not so easy to tackle, right? Well,
so the question though
you asked the question. How does it work? How does it work with translatable options? So the thing is, and it's a bit tricky because we only implement that actually for WPML, right? So we don't know how it would work actually with other translation plugins. But what you essentially do is, for the global options, we always check, or we will check the default language, or check if the current language is the default language. If not, switch the language to the default language, get the option, and then switch the language back. And the reason why it needs to be done like that, I believe, is that usually like ACF also adds like a suffix to the to an option when it's in a different language, right? So you will always have like the option name and then underscore and then the language, like the language code, a 2-letter code. And the default language doesn't have that, actually.
Yeah. So together, right, that's how you get a global option?
That's how you get a global option, yes.
Right. Because like out of the box, kind of, it's always translatable options, kind of, because that's what WPML does.
Yes.
Or like if you are not using WPML, then a translatable option and global options are essentially the same because there are no multiple languages.
Exactly.
And so we have to kind of implement this kind of hack to enable global options so that you do not have to change an option in all languages when you want it to change for the whole website.
Yeah. And while there are probably also ways to do that without any code, just with configuring WPML in a certain way, our experience is just that it's just easier and more reliable and also a bit more future-proof to do it in the way that we are doing it now. So, that was the reason for that.
Yeah. Let's talk about what goes into translatable options and global options a bit more. Why? Because this morning we had a neat discussion about that. Creating option pages is a feature of ACF Pro. Mm-hmm. And what if you don't have ACF Pro? What if you just want to use ACF? You can't use these options pages, okay, but when you want to use Flint, you need that, and we would like to get rid of that kind of dependency of requiring a Pro. And then the question was, how do we enable that with, or instead, like what could we have instead? And I looked into a lot of our translatable options, and I feel many of those are translation strings rather than options. And like small text, like read more, and then you can translate that in a different language. And while that is very convenient, I was thinking if this could be more like a native WordPress translation and go into a PO file.
Yeah, and you're right, for a lot of cases and a lot of components, many of these translatable options are like labels or text content that you want to display as a default or something like that, right? And I think for a basic version that doesn't use or that can't use ACF Pro, it might suffice to actually have that, right? To say that you use native WordPress translation functionality, but as soon as it gets more complicated, and you already said something before with slider animation delay or something like that, right? That's where it starts not to make sense to have to do the translatable option. So I don't know. I probably wouldn't put this in a translatable option anyways, but in a global option. But you never know. Maybe maybe there are some studies that show that people speaking a certain country are more used to certain speeds and animations. Or
faster
like
animation for faster languages.
Yes. What is a fast language? French, Spanish, are these fast languages? And German is slow, and
it probably just sounds fast to people who don't speak it.
Or Asian languages.
But these native translations that we're talking about from WordPress, what are they actually? Why are there native translation functionalities if WordPress doesn't provide translations? I think I can only come to the conclusion that this is only meant for the backend and not for the front end, because WordPress does have the functionality to have the backend in multiple languages, but not really the front end. However, I don't know. I'm a bit confused.
You mean why the WordPress translation functionality isn't used for front end stuff, but it's only used for backend, like in general?
Yeah, right. What that is at all? What is that is meant to be used for? And I think I feel like it's meant to be used to translate pieces of the backend mostly.
Yes, mostly.
That's where it's coming from.
Also, things like not necessarily backend only, but definitely not things that the content editor can edit, right? So you do have translations for days of the week or other things that you could always use, but you don't it's usually you want to translate content, right? And this this whole process of generating these PO files and whatever, this is not there are solutions that actually do that via the database, and this is actually what WPML also can do, right? And or the MO files, and then you can create translations for that actually, so that you can edit the translations that were meant to be, or these back-end translations kind of, or these coded translations. That you can edit them via the WP admin, but for any content that the client or the user enters in the content editor, of course, this cannot be translated, and that's where the additional translation functionality comes in then. And we could also talk about these translation options, right? So because like translation, like a lot of people see different things when it's about translation, right? Some people just want to, as you just mentioned, or what how this works. This type of translation is just translate strings. So you have one string that in one language means the one thing, and in another language means another thing, right? But then you also might have translations where the German page has totally different content than the English page, right? And if you work with something like Gutenberg or in Flint with our flexible content, you can easily do that by just saying, okay, I have a blank piece of content and I can just fill that with whatever I want, but it's still a translation of this, like the article in the different language, right? So, yeah. And this is then how things get kind of really complicated when it's about like multilingual stuff.
Yeah, right. And where you want to be rather independent and flexible to break out of the translation concept and to have different structures on a different language and so on. I really like that. Yeah, what we're talking about, the native WordPress translation, like they also, they I think they don't call it translations, but more like localization and internationalization and stuff like that. And it's more meant to be like, yeah, to localize, like also date functions and so on, and some labels and so on. But you can still use it in the front end, right? To localize themes and things in the front end.
A lot of plugins do that. I mean, any plugin that renders, or also in a theme, if you have like, and this is like the first step, right? The first step for internationalization in this case is, okay, I have this string here, and I put it into my theme. This is hard-coded, but I allow you to change that via translation. Like this, this would be something to get like this editability for the user, for the content editor.
Right.
But we, with our approach, or also with WPML, you go one step further, right? You just say, okay, it doesn't like really matter where the content is. There's not a static spot for something, and also this static thing or the thing that you put in it can change. It's not something hard coded in the theme.
Yeah. So also with this localization, how can I use it with WordPress? You only use it by setting the language in WordPress to a different language in the backend, right? So you would change the language for the theme for everyone. That's different. Like our translation approach, it's about whatever language the user has set, or whatever language version of the website they're looking at. Whereas the other localization is meant to be like, for localizing the theme for everyone. But I would be rather sure that WPML can pick up this localization to serve it also for various language translations. Is that right? Should be.
I think I didn't 100% follow what.
Okay. Like I'm just like still wondering if we can use the localization feature of WordPress for translating content for users, kind of. So we have two versions on the website, one for a German homepage and one for an English homepage. And that WPML would be able to pick up those different versions, language versions that we set up with WordPress, which are meant for localization when you change the language of the whole website in the back end. I feel that's a bit hard to explain what's in my head there. But
we might need to think about the scope of so when like as you said, we are thinking about a version of Flint where you don't need ACF Pro, but where you can use just ACF. And maybe we should think about what else this means, right? Because if you don't like, I think maybe we don't need to think about it too hard how internationalization works, because WPML is also a paid plugin, and it's either like starting something and doing a simple, making a simple start, getting a simple like a head start to try out Flint is like then one thing, and the next thing is, okay, if you really like that and if you see how awesome the developer experience is and what you can achieve in very little time, then you will go all in. And okay, then you have to say, yeah, then it's like $200 a year to get all the licenses that you need. We are not getting any money. It's just the plugins that we tell you to use. And then, you can get the full experience of it. I think, but if we are talking about this now, then we should make a note that we modify our functions for defining translatable and global options in a way that if you don't have WPML installed, or if you don't use like a translation plugin, that it will automatically merge these and maybe call them differently, just global options or just options or theme options or something like that, so that it makes it even less confusing, because this having a translatable options a menu item when you only have one language is a little bit weird, right?
Could be, but at the same time, it could make sense if you want to change the theme language at some point again. But this again isn't how it's working. Like it's meant to be for the end user, the language, and not the backend theme language. But I think I know what you mean. So long story short, like I think the concept of global options and translatable options is a great one that I think WordPress should have, and that helped us a lot and still helps us a lot with defining additional things, options for editors, giving more flexibility, at the same time allowing people to control certain things and so on. And I like that thing a lot. I just wish there was an easier way to come up or to manage those and a more native ways. And it's a little pity because, now we're looking into how we can get rid of some of this to not depend on that in Flint. And WordPress does have some internationalization options also to, what did I read here? For disambiguation by context. Like, for example, that you could have also a string read more, and then for different contexts, maybe for different components or so on within a website. And so there are options to define things. It's just there's no great way from the core, like to edit things and to use them as a developer again and so on. It's more like a hard-coded thing and not an easy-to-edit option. So if anyone listening to this has some better ideas to make use, or plugins or libraries to use such a concept, we'd be very open for that and consider going down another route. But let us know and write it down in the comments.
Yeah. I think that wraps up the whole option topic, right? Still a lot to discover, but pretty clear what to do.
I think so.